One of my mods here, Stephanie, good to see you. Apparently, SM Kovalinsky is struggling to see you there. So, SM Kovalinsky, is everything fine? Everything sorted out? Bria Lace, good to see you. Are any of my other mods here? Baron Tuck, good to see you. Thanks for making it, guys. Songbird, Down the Rabbit Hole, good to see you guys. So I actually had a video that I had put together, and I was kind of just hoping that YouTube would finish its check, but unfortunately it took all the time from about 2 hours ago till now to actually get it almost ready. So unfortunately, I would have liked to have put that up an hour before this one, but unfortunately it didn't happen. Helen Hawley, good to see you. Dee Abel, to see you. So in this live stream, we're going to deviate a little bit from what I wanted to do. I actually thought the previous video on how to stop this from happening, I thought that would be, I thought it would be something that more people would pay attention to. And because not many people have, I'm not going to talk that much about what Brian could have done differently. There were some sort of sarcastic comments at the beginning of the live stream, the chat, where people said certain things, and maybe it's too soon to be talking about that. Like, as a man, what could Brian have done to build resilience? And I kind of get the feeling people don't really have sympathy, or not sympathy, but people don't really aren't in the right space to have that conversation. So I'm not going to have it. Something I want to tell you guys, just in line with what I said about social responsibility in terms of Gabby Petito. Today was quite a stressful day. I went to a breakfast buffet somewhere that I've never gone before. And then I took Timmy to a friend's house because I didn't want him locked up all midday. And so I dropped him off at a friend's house where there are two other dogs and there are also cats. And he's been there before. He's in fact spent quite a lot of time there. I think at one point he spent 3 or 4 weeks there. So he's very familiar with that area. Because of a couple of things, I made sure that he didn't come out the gate. And anyway, long story short, I was dishing up. It was about 40 minutes after I dropped him off. I kind of got a phone call, and it was from a number I didn't know. And I was a little bit tempted I didn't really want to take the call. And it was someone I didn't know. And she said, "Is your dog Timmy?" And my spirits dropped. And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, I found your dog in the road." And I said, "Well, is it this road, which is the road that I left him in?" She said, "No, that road." And that road is very, very close to a major highway, like a double lane highway. And this is a complete stranger, someone I've never met before, someone who doesn't know my dog, someone who turned off the highway and actually stopped her car, got out the car, didn't know this dog, took the dog home, and then called me. And so that is social responsibility. That is someone seeing something, anticipating something, taking responsibility, and probably almost certainly saving Timmy's life, because that is a very, very, very busy highway. And also, there are a lot of car accidents there anyway. So Timmy, she could also not have called me. She could have just kept the dog or whatever. So it just shows you, if that person didn't do that, would another person have done it? And if no one did that, where would Timmy be right now? I don't think in a very good place. I wouldn't be in a good place either. So I just want to put that into perspective, this whole idea of social responsibility. Timmy was in a very precarious situation. I'm not quite sure what happened. I'm not sure whether, I don't want to give away too many details, but I'm not sure whether he got through a hole in the perimeter fence or whether when someone came and went, he slipped out. But there are 2 other dogs and they are still there and they didn't get out. So not quite sure what exactly happened. But the point is that he got out and it was a very close call. But I'm just saying the other side of it is, if you think about that scenario, a dog running around the neighborhood, approaching a very busy highway, the odds are, I think, very strong that there's not going to be a happy outcome unless somebody does something. And somebody fortunately did something, and I'd really express my gratitude. Stephanie, thanks so much for that. I'm so glad you're here. So grateful. Timmy's okay. I'm also, yeah. Thanks for that. Thanks for that comment. It's been it's been quite a tough month. For I think quite a lot of people. Susan says there are a lot of kind people out there. I hope my voice is going to last this live stream if it's giving out already. Timmy, do you want some? Save some for me. Should I give you some more? Okay. Do you want some more? Cats seem to be better at this than dogs. Yes, I'm also glad the person called me. I mean, very, very grateful for that. Wow, my voice. Timmy, I think I'm going to need this water. So I prepared quite a lot. If you have a look over here, I want to share with you some of the reading material that I recommended in the previous video, and also articles on the Zap family. I'll tell you guys more about that in a moment. Let me have a look at some of your comments. I've stopped traffic to help a dog. Good for you, Susan. Paula D. Susan, to me, is safe. Thanks to her kindness. Down the rabbit hole. It's funny watching Timmy's eyebrows as he listens to his adventures. Okay. Susan Becker, good to see you both. Thanks, Susan. Are you okay? Yeah, I must say it's just been a difficult month. Definitely been quite a difficult month. LB, hi from Australia. We're big dog lovers. Okay. Roxanne Silver, hello from El Paso, Texas. So let's get on to the Gabby Petito case. I want to jump right in and sort of hold us accountable, meaning you, me, other YouTubers, other creators, other commentators, right? Now, I think one of the things that has definitely changed as the true crime genre has evolved is this whole idea of, once upon a time, when I covered my very first case, keep phone number on dog's collar. Yes, it is on the dog collar. It is on there. It's on the other side of it. When I covered the Oscar Pistorius case, it was the very first case I covered. I got the standard, butt out, wait till the trial, leave this to the experts, all that kind of thing. And there was almost kind of a sense that it's wrong, as in it's illegal or it's just immoral or something, to think about a true crime scenario before it's gone to trial, or even while it's gone to trial. Now, look how far we've come, where if you take the Brian Laundrie case and the Gabby Petito case, we are talking about all sorts of things while it is or as it is happening. We're almost dealing with the case in real time, almost the same way the law enforcement are. And in a similar way, law enforcement are allowing us to do that. Now, I want to contrast the Gabby Petito case with Barry Morphew, Laurie Vallow, and Summer Wells, where body cam footage wasn't really released until very late. In the Barry Morphew case, virtually, I don't think any body cam. So some constituencies hold on to that till the very last minute and don't really want to release anything, whereas others will almost dump it on you. If you think about the Chris Watts case, also held on to everything and then suddenly dumped it all and dumped a lot of it. But true crime has come quite a long way, where we are now, it's almost normal to speculate. Even this idea of speculating, there is wild speculation and there is, to some extent, reasonable speculation. So, for example, Gabby, before her remains were found, Gabby, we didn't know where she was, but Brian returns without her. I think it's very unreasonable to think people aren't going to speculate, what's going on there. And also it's a bit unreasonable to say to someone, don't speculate. It's not a good situation, especially given the Moab incident, right? Then when Gabby's remains were found, shouldn't one then speculate what is likely? I just mean, I don't think it's odd. I don't think you're crossing a line going, well, this is what it looks like, right? And so this is very much a case like that, where we were speculating. And then when in the fugitive phase, there was obviously a heck of a lot of speculation, and it sort of went all over the place. There were people who speculated wildly, and there were people who speculated, I guess, randomly, and then there were people who speculated somewhat intelligently. And now I think it's time to look at that and say, just as one of the things you want to touch on, were we on track or off track? So one of the things I said, and I'm sure you'll remember this, is I said that I think he's indoors, right? That he's not even in a reserve anywhere. So I was wrong about that. But I was assuming that he was alive. So I assumed if he's alive, meaning if he's been able to fool the searchers, then that is probably because he's not outdoors, right? And I think that reasoning was sound. So what I want to ask you guys is, how many of you thought that he was alive for most of this time? So if you thought he was alive, put a 1. If you didn't think he was alive, it's like, I knew it all along, put a 2. Let's just see what you guys say. Okay, so I saw 1, 2 there. Sharon Tuck, one of the mods, says a 2, but quite a lot of 1s. Stephanie also 1. It seems like maybe 2/3. Are you guys being honest? Two-thirds say that they thought that he was alive, and a third that he wasn't. It does make sense now why no one could see him or find him, because he wasn't alive. He wasn't able to be sighted. And in true crime, when you're dealing with a missing person, and this applies to Gannon Stork, Suzanne Morphew, Madeleine McCann, any missing person, one of the crucial questions, one of the first questions you ask is, am I looking for a living person or not? Because there's a kind of, or including Summer Wells, because the difference between looking for a living person and a non-living person is totally different. You might say, well, that's obvious, but just think about dogs. With a living person, you would be using sniffer dogs, like trackers, and with a person who's no longer alive, cadaver dogs, right? That's just one distinction. Of course, you could use both, but if you know what you're looking for, you would prefer to focus in a certain way. There's also the aspect of, if you're looking for a living person, you're looking for line of sight, above ground sightings, right? And this is where I want to direct your attention to some of these YouTube channels that were talking about a sighting almost every day, if not every other day, right? And so that brings us to the next question. And I hope those of you who put a number 2 aren't going to be talking about this, aren't going to be saying, yes, I actually thought that sighting was legitimate, because if you thought he wasn't alive, how can there be a sighting? So here's the question. Let's see how many of you thought that the Brian in Canada was Brian. If you thought it was Brian, put a 2. If you didn't think it was Brian, put a 1. Let's have a look. Teddy's mom, good to have you here. So most of you didn't think that that was legit. Okay, I think I saw 1. There's another one of you who did. Okay, so that was one of the earliest things, and as far as I was concerned, the photo didn't look anything like him. I didn't think it was even close. I mean, the person had a beard, but to me, nothing else was really similar. And I also thought Canada, I don't think so. I don't think he got that far. How did he get there? But you could also argue, well, it could have been him. It's possible. And that's where it comes down to things like intuition. How many of you thought that Matterwicks, did they find his body? Well, they found his skeleton. So how many of you thought that Brian was on the Appalachian Trail? And I expect to see quite a few. So 1 for no and 2. Did you think the Appalachian Trail sighting was legit? I see a 2. I see quite a few 2s. I see even Stephanie said 2. So also quite a few 1s. So this channel was at least on that score. I never gave that any credibility. I thought it's too obvious. He was not going to go somewhere where everyone thinks he's going to go. It's too obvious. A lot of his friends and a lot of people said Appalachian Trail. I really didn't think that would be the case. Would he possibly have ended up there if he wasn't suicidal, or if an accident didn't happen? We don't really know what did happen, but if, let's say, what happened to him was an accident, would he have ended up on the Appalachian Trail? That's a different question. One thing that I did sort of quickly address in the video I made that I wasn't able to post was, could Brian have run out of potable water, meaning, fresh, clean water? Could he have run out of that and then been tempted to drink the water around him or whatever, and then got ill or got sunstroke or something like that? Could dehydration have been a factor? You might think it's this dramatic thing that happened to him, but it could also be just being outside in the heat day after day. Could you get dehydrated? As she says, dysentery. And that is something that happened to Nora Corrin. She was out in the jungle for 10 days, and there was a stream where she was, but she, according to the inquest, she died of starvation and possibly stress. And there was a lot of sort of consternation of what could have happened to her. Obviously, she was a lot younger than Brian, but nevertheless. So let's go to another sighting. Did any of you think that Brian was in Mexico? If you thought he was in Mexico, put a 2. If you thought he was in Mexico. Max says, I didn't think he had it in him to take his own life. Yeah, I didn't think that was on the cards. I remember the parents saying that they were concerned. Now, the fact that he was apparently clearly in distress, possibly even grieving, So not too many of you thought he was in Mexico. Anyone think that he was in Guatemala? If you thought he was in Guatemala, put a 2. Not too many thought he was in Guatemala. Did any of you think that he was in South Africa? So you might say you did. In fact, the video I put up just before he was found, I speculated on that in that area. I said basically what a friend had said, that he was interested in Neil Blomkamp, that he'd spoken a lot about South Africa, but at the end of the video I did say long term he might want to go there. It's not going to be very easy, but I said right now I think he's in Florida. So my position was always that he was in Florida, and that he was actually probably still in Northport, in a neighborhood nearby. So that turned out to be quite accurate. I was actually astonished that he was like 4 or 5 miles away from his parents' home. I do think this isn't a good look for law enforcement. The huge amount of resources. One of the true crime 101 things when you're looking for a missing person is start at the epicenter, the place the person was last seen, and radiate outwards. No matter what else is going on, you want to do a search, especially in that fabric within the first couple of miles, right? So many people have been discovered in that situation. Nora Corrin was, Gannon Stork, I guess, is kind of an exception, but then I think he was left in the airport parking, which is also fairly close by. Anyway, so quite a few cases where that is the case. Obviously, Casey Anthony scenario. What it is looking like is that law enforcement made a boo-boo with that water bottle. It is really looking like that water bottle is Brian's or Gabby's, and we saw law enforcement pass that over, probably being a bit dismissive towards this sort of amateur investigator. But it does show you that amateurs are capable of producing something. We don't know. It's also possible that that was planted, but it does look like quite an old bottle. It looks like a bottle that's not brand new. So who knows? Thanks, Susie, to anyone. Thanks a lot for that. Do you think anything was planted? I personally don't think that water bottle was planted, but law enforcement thus far seems to not regarded as credible. But certainly some reporters are starting to, I saw at least 2 or 3 credible reporters think that that is credible evidence. I also tend to think so. Tali says, love for everyone experiencing loss. Thanks for that. Molly Moon says, I believe the parents saying he was in the Colton Reserve. I had no clue what he'd do when the reserve flooded. Sageti Nona has a question. She says, do you think he took his life before or after Gabby's body was found? That's quite a good question. It's quite a good question. The other question that arises from that is, did he have the ability to communicate with the outside world, right? So that then brings up the burner phone. Did he take a burner phone with him? If he did he have reception in that part of the reserve? If he didn't, could he move to somewhere where he could have reception? Now, one of the reasons why I thought he was still alive was that I thought that because of the case was sort of exploding, that I thought that he would take an interest. And a lot of people have been describing Brian as a narcissist, right? And some still do. I don't think a narcissist would take his own life with all of this going on, all of this discussion about a person, right? It's also not a given that he did. It's possible that he injured himself. It's possible that there was sunstroke. It's possible that something else happened. But if we take your question on face value, that he did take his own life, to be honest, I don't think that that's the case. I think that let's just say grief got to him. That's what I think. You might say something else got to him as well. So a question that has come up is also, someone apparently heard a shot on October 9th, which is quite late. And one could speculate that the shot went off because someone was wandering around the reserve and got close to him and he panicked. He didn't want to get caught. He thought he was going to get caught. It could also be random, but if that shot was Brian, that's October 9th. That was, about a month into his naked and afraid thing, and that's quite long. And one's got to ask, if that is the case, could a body be skeletonized in, 2 weeks from the 9th till now? And I'm not sure I believe that. I think that's a bit quick. So something else that has come up is, which scavengers are we talking about? Which scavengers are very likely? And some of you may have seen the article from, I think the guy's name is Wiseman or something. I could be wrong. But he apparently lived 1 mile from approximately where the reserve is. And he's obviously very familiar with it. And he said there are a lot of alligators. The area, his words, the area is teeming with alligators and also carnivorous wild pigs. And in his opinion, he thought that the carnivorous wild pigs were more likely to do what happened. Thanks, Songbird. I don't think it's either or. I think it's probably both. I think it's both animals, could be involved. Bear in mind, the area was underwater. I don't know how good swimmers wild pigs are, and I don't know if wild pigs would, I would imagine wild pigs and alligators are sort of, they don't want to, where wild pigs are, alligators aren't, and vice versa. The wild pigs don't want to be eaten up by alligators. So you could imagine a scenario where when there was a lot of water, there would be more of an alligator scenario, right? So I think one's just got to think about it like that. Crawfish, Ramona, that's a good point as well. Dave Dakin went today to spot where remains were found, can see where it had been flooded, about knee deep. Pigs were digging there. That's interesting. Dave, any other observations? Did you smell anything? Was it very hot? Did you sort of feel that you were dehydrating or can one drink any of the water that's there? Nice Try says, if there are so many alligators and boars, then why, when the 2 bodies were found at the beginning, why weren't they bothered by animals? Well, I think it depends where they were. Patricia, you did say that. Christina, thank you very much, Christina. Brittany says, so how did the dogs not smell him? Was that already answered? No, I haven't looked at that. That's a good question. I think you've got to accept that, and I don't like to be graphic, and I don't want to be graphic, but I think you've got to accept that a lot of the tissue has been consumed. It's not like it's not decomposing. And I think there are quite a few people who imagine that maybe there were some scavengers, but overall there was decomposition to the point of being a skeleton. I think what you need to imagine instead is 80 to 90%, by far the majority of the reduction of the form of the physical form was from consumption, was from some creature, some organism consuming, and so that can't be traced by a dog because it's gone, right? And so the amount that is going to be left behind is small and small. We also don't know how long Brian was there before that process started, right? We don't know, and we also don't know, was Brian attacked, for example, by an alligator? So that would also have a bearing. I also think, now I know some of you who really know about cadaver odor will say, but water can carry cadaver odor. But I think there's a difference between a full-sized cadaver in water and very little, like just a hand or a foot. The amount of water is also going to be a factor. The other thing is, when the searchers went in there, Brian may have been alive. So let me just be clear about that. If that area was searched, Brian may have been alive, perhaps somewhere else, or perhaps in the area, and the dog simply, didn't find him. And then subsequently, after he died, it was underwater and the dogs weren't there, right? I do think the fact that he was skeletonized makes it harder for the dogs because there's less to work with, if that makes sense. It's hard to know what to say about this without knowing exactly where the cadaver dogs were taken, because the cadaver dog isn't taken to very close to the spot, then they're not going to alert. Cadaver dogs are sort of very specific in where they're smelling. You can't take them over a mountain. You've got to take them to a specific spot like a lounge or a car, and direct them, right? When I say direct them, I mean allow them to smell in that area, not sort of influence them. Whereas a sniffer dog, I think, has got far more free range to sort of run around and sniff to try and pick up a trail, slightly different. It does feel like a lot of this could have been avoided if law enforcement were just a little bit sharper. If they could have caught Brian leaving, if something had happened during the Moab incident. I don't know, it just sort of feels like there could have been a different outcome. And this water bottle thing seems to just show there's a little bit of, I don't know what the word is. I don't know if it's complacency or what. I don't know. Search dogs versus cadaver dogs for different smells. So you probably didn't sleep from the day. Well, we don't know that for certain, and you must be careful saying X killed Y, because Brian does have a lawyer, and things have got to be proved. And if you say something like that, you may be called to prove your case, and it knows whether there'll be enough evidence. So be careful. There has been also some sort of discussion in terms of Brian, if he did take his own life, did he use a rope? And a rope was shown today on Instagram, and then or was it using a gun? To me, we don't know what happened to that gun in his room. That would certainly make things a lot clearer if we did know. But I do think that that a gun is more likely. It's sort of there's not a lot of suffering with a gun. It's instant, right? And I want to talk briefly about this because I know a little bit about this, unfortunately. My mother committed suicide, and my mother never left a suicide note. So you mustn't think that when someone takes their life, it's absolutely guaranteed that they're going to leave a note. My mother didn't. And then you get Vincent Van Gogh, who's an artist, right? And you have Brian, who's also an artist, right? Artists are expressive people, right? Thanks, Joyce. Artists are expressive people. Vincent van Gogh was a particularly expressive artist. He wrote hundreds of letters. His art was very expressive, right? He was also expressive personality. He was a larger than life figure. But the interesting thing with Vincent van Gogh, and I actually went to France to kind of investigate. I've written a book on Vincent van Gogh as well. If Vincent van Gogh committed suicide, then why did they never find the gun? I mean, if he shot himself, I don't want to go too much into this, but Vincent van Gogh shot himself in a really weird way and then stumbled back to his hotel room, and then he died many, many hours later. But they never found the gun. Now, why wouldn't you? I mean, if you're committing suicide, you're not going to hide the gun away. Whereas if someone has shot someone, you would hide. The other thing is, he was apparently painting at the time, so why would he hide his paint supplies away, right? The point I'm trying to make is, if someone does take their own life, well, then the gun is going to be right there, right? There's no reason why the animals would take the gun, right? And there's a possibility that the water could have moved it in a certain area, but using a metal detector, I think, wouldn't be that hard to find it. So if they don't find a gun, that's going to be problematic. So, if they don't find a gun, then I think you've got to start to think about things like dehydration and an alligator, animals at night, snakes even, other things. I think if you don't find the gun, then you can't insist that is likely, because it would have just been left where it was used. I do think they may need to bring in animal behavior folk and kind of environmentalists to study that area and find out what kind of animals are there and what kind of animals pose a threat to human beings, as in animals that could fatally injure a person. Spiders, scorpions, snakes, and then bigger animals. History Underfoot said hanging is a possibility. It definitely is, but I don't think it is if you've got access to something like a handgun. So the other thing is, if you had hanged yourself, then the body should probably have been found still on the rope. It would be quite difficult to extricate, and if not, the knot would still be present, kind of thing. I think that rope would be quite easy to find, kind of thing as well. So what I want you guys to think about, just coming back to the social media, is, do you remember there were some channels talking about a sighting every second day, a sighting here, a sighting there, and how many of those proved to be true? None of them, because Brian was never beyond where he was, right? And so just think about that, how much attention those sightings got and how valid were any of them? How valid were those sightings? Janelle says, do you think Brian told his parents? No, I don't. I don't think so. It is interesting that they went kind of directly to where they went, which seems to show they knew, or how can I put it? It seems to show that they had an idea where he would go based on where he'd gone. And I remember, and this is quite interesting, I remember when those protesters were harassing Cassie, there was a really interesting question that someone asked saying, where did Brian usually go camping? And there was also a question, where did the family normally spend their summers? And I think, and she didn't really answer that very much, I think that was a very important question. I think another question that they could have asked is, when Brian was a kid, where did he go and play? when Brian, anyway, but that's theoretical, because you're anticipating that someone's going to give you useful information, or would they have? Brianna says there's no funeral. I think there will be no official funeral, but I'm sure his family will remember him in some way. I don't think there'll be a gravestone, and I don't think there'll be kind of whatever they decide to say won't be streamed like Gabby's funeral was. But I do think there will be some kind of commemoration, a closed thing. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little event taking place, perhaps inside the home, and it's streamed to Brian's family members. I've just been in a situation where my best friend died earlier this month, and his funeral was streamed to lots of people, and there wasn't like a coffin, and there wasn't a church kind of thing, and it was just done that way. So I don't know why it wouldn't be the same for Brian's family. I really don't think they will just do nothing. But from the public's perspective, I don't think there will be anything. Sally says, could it be a John Doe? I don't think it's a John Doe. What is your opinion on the protesters outside the laundry home? I don't know if you mean right now. There's a side to me that thinks it absolutely makes sense to be indignant with the way things have happened. And it makes absolute sense with the amount of publicity that this has gotten, that it has activated certain people. On the other hand, there's a part of me that thinks that can get out of hand, and it can become lawless kind of thing. It's something where if it continues, someone is actually guilty of harassment, and it's actually kind of disturbing the peace. So there's an aspect that I think is human and normal, and in a way, putting pressure on them, maybe it's a good thing. On the other hand, if you just think of it going on and on and on, something happening, and then you go to that person's house. Now, what if it happens to you? Someone thinks you did something, but you actually didn't, and they come to your house. Is it fair? Is it right? I wouldn't be surprised if the laundries have to move out of that house. I wouldn't be surprised if they go and live somewhere else, and possibly have to sell that house, and also struggle to sell that house, which is quite, you might think, well, it's just desserts, but a lot of true crime cases, the John Benet Ramsey case, the Chris Watts case, those houses are unsellable, and so that's kind of the flip side of all that publicity, in a way, negative publicity. Kathy Bolello says, I have to research the weather for 9/9 to 9/20. I mean, that's another factor. One might want to look at the weather. How was the weather? If you watch Survivor, some of those people on Survivor become really miserable when the weather just won't stop raining. Pippa Longstocking says, if Brian didn't tell his parents something very serious happened, I think you mean in Wyoming, then why would they have obtained an attorney? SM Kovalinsky, thanks a lot. I see you've solved your problem, but thank you very much for that. No question from you, SM Kovalinsky, no comment there. Susan says it rained a lot. Generally, when police question people, they usually start out treating them well, encouraging rapport, inciting trust. Protesters did the opposite. The pressure strategy didn't work. Yeah. Well, it did in a way, because you did get Cassie coming out and kind of making a statement, and her statement led to some interesting. I don't know if you guys remember when Cassie made a statement. It sort of led to the timeline changing, and she said some interesting things. One of the things she said was that Brian was completely normal at the camp and didn't mention Gabby at all, which is different to how Brian's demeanor was described when he left. Now, it could be that he was normal and that when he knew he was leaving, that when you leave, sometimes the emotions do hit you. Was it flooded when Brian went to the park? I don't know, but I would assume not, but I could be wrong. I've got the feeling that when he went there, he wouldn't have gone there if it was flooded. So just have a look at what I've written here. So I want to sort of go back to the beginning in a way and just talk about this whole concept of how workable, how realistic was the van life thing, right? Probably what happened with Gabby and Brian is they looked at other van lifers and said, hey, we want to do that. And also kind of said, hey, we can do that. And then they had a plan, and their parents, certainly Gabby's parents, said that they had a plan and they worked on this. And there's a friend of Brian's who said that Brian was a planner and that he could execute his plan. And a lot of us interpreted that to mean, well, if Brian wanted to get away, get out of the country, then he could plan it and do it. He could find the resources and he would have the initiative. And I don't think too many of us thought that Brian could have a plan to take his own life, because a lot of people forget that. A lot of people think that if you take your own life, it just happens like that. The thought occurs to you and you just do it. Whereas in reality, people who take their own lives often flirt with the idea, they often play with the idea in their minds. It's something you never hear about. We think about the premeditated murder of somebody else, but you never really think of the idea of the premeditated murder of oneself, the premeditation, excuse me, the thinking that goes into taking one's own life, right? And so was that a factor with Brian? Bear in mind, he didn't take his wallet. He didn't take his phone. We don't know if he took a burner phone. But I remember quite early on, even when I was Christy Baudry, sorry to hear about your dad. Okay. Thanks a lot for that. Christy, I want to quickly talk about grief, and I hope this is going to help you. When we're dealing with death, in this particular case, the Gabby Petito case, we kind of voyeurs in a scenario where there's a stranger, and I think it touches us. We think Gabby was a beautiful young woman, and we get this sense of tragedy that things happened the way they did, that that they didn't have to be this way, and just this devastating way that her life ended, right? But when it's somebody then it is so much worse because you live with it permanently. It's a permanent thing. A friend of mine died 3 weeks ago today, and in a terrible way. And there is no silver lining to death. When it's somebody close to you, there's no silver lining. You might say things like, well, I'll see the person in heaven, but there's no comfort really in terms of your life. Your life, you're never going to see them again in your life. And so you start off with denial. And I must say, I heard Gabby's parents say something like, we're not paying any attention to Brian. People were saying, are we investigating Brian? Is Brian a suspect? the initial thing that her parents said was, we're not going to talk about Brian. Our focus is Gabby. And as a true crime person, I thought that's not on, because he needs to be held accountable. But having been in the situation now myself, I wasn't interested in the person responsible for killing my friend. It was a car accident or a minibus, whatever. And I also wasn't interested in that. I was just thinking of my friend. I didn't have room in that trauma to want to pursue someone, even though one knew that they were responsible. I don't mean that I feel that way now. I mean, I've said that I do want to be at trial when it happens, because there will be a trial. And I have been keeping up with information, what has been happening. But what I'm saying is the grief is so, thanks a lot, Julie. The grief is so overwhelming that you can only handle certain things at a time. And so I really understood the Petitos not being able to deal with Brian while they were trying to absorb the grief in the beginning. And I don't know if you've noticed, since then it has changed to words like vengeance and anger. In the beginning, that wasn't there. That has since changed. And so grief is a process. And a lot of us want grief to be like, you feel it and it's over. And you want grief to be knowable. You want to know when it's going to end or how big it is and what effect it is, but you don't. And death is something that is very much hidden from us. When someone dies, they are covered and taken away. So we are very unfamiliar with it. That's right, Stephanie. We're very unfamiliar with it. And I think in true crime, there's a sense of, I think a weird sense where we are trying to deal with our anxiety. And to some extent, it's about death, but to some extent, it's also just about things that we don't know, and things like evil and things like justice. But I think a lot of that's also got to do with our ability to interrogate death, right? That kind of thing. I'm going to be dealing with that with Ernest Becker a little bit later in this live stream. So pay attention to that. But I just want to, in a way, comfort you to let you know that it's a process, and you must allow that process to run. So you're going to feel a certain way, and then it's going to change, and it's going to turn into something else. And sometimes it feels overwhelming. I've certainly felt waves of it. It sort of hits you and then it passes. I've watched quite a few movies in the last couple of days, and I've tried to be quite social, and I've tried not to just be at home. I don't know if it's good to brood on something that's not going to change. I also don't think you should escape certain things, but you should just allow the emotions to come and go. Don't dwell on them. Don't invite them in. Just let them flow through you, and don't judge them or judge yourself. Just allow it to flow through you. And the biggest thing I want to say about grief is that grief is actually good. There have been times when I've thought, was I really such a good friend, or was he such a good friend, or whatever? But the amount of grief I'm feeling, and the length of it and the breadth of it, that is all you really need to know. That convinces you of what relationship you had, what meaning it had to you, and that is an edifying thing. The fact that you feel grief, especially if you feel it in this terrible way, is a sign that you're a deep person and a good person, and that you loved someone. If you didn't feel for them, and there wasn't this residual, almost ghost that just fills you with pain, then you would be a very shallow person, and the impact on your life would also be very superficial. So in a way, that grief is a a good thing. It's a symptom that you're a good person. It's a symptom that they were a good influence on you. And so think of grief as a good thing, that if you're feeling it, it's a sign of goodness, a sign of goodness in you and a sign of goodness in them. And from there, I think you've got to try and find meaning. So you in mourning, you're kind of suffering, but you've got to find some meaning. So I said earlier, there's no silver lining to it, but you can make a silver lining. So you can decide, on this day, I'm going to do this or remember that. You can decide that you're going to do something in your life that's different, that because of what has happened, because you've lost this person, you're going to find something in your life that is meaningful and that you need. You're going to focus on something more. One of the things when somebody dies is you realize life is precious and it's not guaranteed, and that's a good thing. That you have that space where you say, maybe I should be living more mindfully. Maybe I should be living more assertively. Maybe I shouldn't just go through the day expecting the day to go the way I wanted. I mean, I was in a way traumatized by what happened to my dog, because I really thought if my dog had died, I would have been really in a bad place, because my dog's kind of a comfort to me. It might sound weird, but given what has happened. And so I'm really grateful to this person for saving him. But at the same time, you've got to, life is precious kind of thing. So I hope that's helpful to you. Janelle says, my dog is my world. It's quite interesting. At the same time that I got a dog, pretty much this friend of mine that passed away also got a dog independently. I didn't tell him I was getting a dog, and he didn't tell me. And we kind of both got dogs. We kind of both went through that thing. And his wife actually even mentioned the dog at the funeral. And a dog walker even spoke at his funeral, just the moments that they had. So if you are someone who's grieving and you don't have a dog, you might want to get one. Get a cat, because that can definitely help you back into the now. Animals are very much in the now, and it's quite encouraging in a way. Joe Public Film says, doesn't sound weird, I miss my Roxy every day. Okay, so what I want to talk about quickly is this idea of the van life thing being this impossible dream for Timmy, do you want attention? This idea of the van life dream being this impossible adventure for Gabby and Brian, right? And I want to contrast that with some people are probably the world's leading van lifers, right? So I want to take this idea that Gabby and Brian struggled, and I want to contrast that with something that's going to kind of blow your mind, right? So, and the reason I'm doing it is what I want you to try and think about is, I don't want to judge Brian or Gabby, but what I want to do is look at this other scenario where they succeeded and say, why? What secret recipe did they have? What was missing with Gabby and Brian that these people seem to have, and that they managed to do it? Okay, Timmy, you're going to have to go on the ground for me to do this. So I've actually met these people, and I've written quite a few articles on it, and these are some of the books that I was recommending. So there's Malcolm Gladwell, The Tipping Point, and The Hours by Michael Cunningham, and World Made by Hand, all books that I recommended in the previous video. But what I want to show you guys, I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to see this, but there's another book called Spark Your Dream. The reason why he called it Spark is because their surname is Zap. So it's like Zap Spark kind of thing. So this is the book they wrote. And then I wrote all of these articles on this family, the Zap family. So this is one of them. So that is the vehicle that they traveled in, the Zenov travel, right? So compare this vehicle to a van, right? How comfortable do you think that was? How easy do you think this vehicle was to maintain? And this was in Longevity magazine. Then I also did this article, zapping through Namibia, and I actually took this photo. And you had to be out of the park before the sun set. So I took this photo, and then I really had to drive really quickly. And that's in this magazine, Leisure Wheels. Let's see if I can find a good picture that shows you what this vehicle looks like. But it's a very old vehicle. It's a vehicle with spokes, right, wooden spokes. And so if they got a flat tire, which they often did, how are you going to change like a flat tire, right? If you need to change a part of this 1928 vehicle, what are you going to do? And this one is from Leisure Wheels. Here's another article I wrote. They're jumping in the air, that's for sure. Here's another one I did, The Incredible Journey. So this is really my contribution to their journey around the world, right? So unlike Gabby and Brian, this family traveled right around the world, not like just, they traveled from Argentina to Alaska. That was one of the first trips they did. And then they traveled around the world. Now, think about Namibia as a country bordering my country. It's like full of sand dunes and sand. Now, how on earth do you go there, not an SUV? I don't know if they've got aircon or anything like that. How do you deal with that? Here's another article in Your Family magazine, right? It's on 6 on the road for 5,000 days and counting, right? Now, how long were Gabby and Brian on the road? They were sort of on the road for, I think, well below 100 days, maybe around about 60 days. This is 5,000 days. And it's not 2 people, it is 2 people plus 4 children, right? Lainey, thanks a lot for that. Wow, that's quite a contribution, Lainey. Thanks very much. So these people took 4 kids with them and they held it together, right? So I might share some of what I wrote in these articles on Patreon, depending on the folks on Patreon if they want me to do that. This is quite a fun day. I actually asked them to reverse into a field of maize just to get that photo. And I had the sun setting behind them. And I'm just going to read the opening paragraph here. They started out as a couple and a car. Now 13 years and 4 kids later, they were on the road for 13 years at this point, right? 13 years. Now 13 years and 4 kids later, the Zaps are still traveling with no intention of stopping. And so this is the opening paragraph I wrote for this article. The Zap family would probably thank you if you urinated against their car's wheels on a hot, dry day. It's what they have to do occasionally to prevent their ancient vehicle's wooden spokes drying out and snapping. Well, they do it if they have no other water available on one of the long stretches during their seemingly endless trip around the world. The Zaps aren't your average suburban family. And then I said 13 years ago, Herman and Candy left their home in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Batman, thanks a lot for that. So I'm just going to show you, okay, so this is a different article, and I'm going to talk about this on a different day. The thing that I want to emphasize, one can go and really make a study of this and look at what was the big difference between Gabby and Brian and the Zaps, but the most basic difference was this. the Zap family were very, very social. So everywhere they went, they didn't often sleep in their vehicle. Everywhere they went, they met people and people invited them into their homes. Everywhere they went, people were just, the car was in the same sense a blessing and a curse. So as much as the car gave them difficulties, people noticed the car, people would stop, people would take photos, and people took an interest. I was one of them. As you saw, I wrote 8 magazine articles on this one family. And but the point is that they were social, and I think they even invited a magazine or some kind of journalist, I think from National Geographic, to travel with them. That ironically, I'm not sure if it was that or something else, but that apparently didn't work out so well. They weren't too happy with how that happened. Grandma Green, Brian thought they would never find her so quickly. It's possible, but it's also possible that Brian remember they were engaged, so 2 weeks before this, he thought of Gabby as his fiancée. So it's also possible that if you bear in mind, if you accept that Brian took his own life, then you can see how there could be very strong feelings. It's not just that, compare Brian to Chris Watts. Some people thought, that he's a typical family annihilator and that he would do that, but he didn't, because he didn't love Shanann that much. He certainly loved his girlfriend a lot more. And so if you contrast them, I think you've got to consider the possibility that he did really love her. And Rose Davis said that they both loved one another, although to some extent things were dysfunctional. But I just want to come back to this. So the thing with the Zaps were they were very social. And so what oiled their journey around the world, what made their journey around the world so simple and easy. What did Pauline Buckle say? I've been researching it for months now. What have you been researching? Sorry, I just caught this comment. So what I'm trying to get at is what made life so much easier for the Zap family was that they saw the world as a friendly place, that they saw the world as someone that was going to enable their journey, and that was a big help. And so the big difference between them and Gabby and Brian was that Gabby and Brian, especially Brian, I think, saw, I see, thanks, Stephanie, saw the world as, in one particular post that I came across quite recently, Brian describes people in a park, I think the Zion National Park, as an infestation. If that's your attitude to people, then you're going to have a different experience than if you on the road and you see people as someone to take their hand, someone that can look after you, right? And let's face it, where we are right now, Gabby needed some looking after. Where we are right now, Brian could have done with some looking after. Adora Guy says, I miss my parents a lot. Sorry to hear that, Adora. And so I think that's something you've got to think about, is where did that negative attitude to the world come from Brian? Did it come from home? Did it come from the media? Did it come from books? Did it come from movies? Did it come from him? Did it come from being bullied at school? Did it come from being weird? Where did it come from? Right? And Monkey Wind with Rob says, where are the Zaps today? I think they did finish their journey. As far as I know, they're back in Argentina, but I don't know that for a fact. I did used to follow them on Facebook. Trisha Wood, poor upbringing from having, okay. Okay, so does anyone have any questions before I move on to the last thing? Yes, King Farouk says in Nomadland they formed warm friendships on the road. It's a very lonely life if you have that attitude of the lone wolf scenario, or it's just me, it's just us against the world kind of thing. When I wrote all of these articles, I was in a way not a van lifer, but I was certainly a freelance photojournalist. So I would travel from A to B, and I would try to write stories on A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So I would go somewhere, but I would have to try to make that trip really worthwhile in order to make a living out of that, right? So if I was going from one place to another, I would try and, it's almost like, like wring the last drop out of a sponge. And it was very interesting work. It was very free-spirited work, but it was also, it came at quite a cost. You really had to go out of your comfort zone. You really had to work hard. And yeah, it's not easy. So, and this was kind of, this is work for magazines, not like YouTubing or whatever. In a way, much harder work. YouTube seems to be kind of a lot easier work for a journalist or something, depending on. Eddie Sipe says, where can I buy your Van Gogh book? It's on Amazon, but I would advise you not to buy the paperback because the text's quite small. I think you should try and buy the Kindle book if you've got a Kindle. If you don't mind quite small text, it's fine. I've been meaning to change that, but the Kindle book has got hyperlinks and it's a much better alternative. Stephanie's just put a link to that. Well, Stephanie, you are definitely on the ball. Viking dogmanship. Brian was probably. I don't see that. I really don't see that. If he was, he wouldn't be in the position he is right now. I saw a comment here. Did you ever feel in danger in your travels? Sometimes I did. Yeah, sometimes I did. Definitely. I was actually quite concerned for the Zaps, but they they made it through South Africa, okay? I see I'm at an hour 15. I think I'm going to stay on just another 15 minutes. Monica says, I think sounds like he was lacking emotional development. Now, bear in mind, if you're still living at home, how emotionally developed are you? You don't have a proper job. You haven't studied in a college. You haven't had much exposure. Are you doing your own laundry? Excuse the pun. Susie, to anyone, thanks a lot for that. Okay, so I'm going to read you a couple of excerpts from this book, The Life and Death of Meaning, if my voice can stand it. So the first quote is page 145. What is normal, right? And I think we've kind of just touched on exactly what I'm going to be reading here, which is what is normal in terms of being independent? What is normal in terms of individuation? And so this is what Ernest Becker says on the topic. He went on to show how characters vary because people choose different ways to relieve themselves of this existential paradox. Some refuse to emerge as distinct persons, which is one way of softening the burden of individuality and also the helplessness in the face of death. We call them oral passive dependent types. They live tucked into others, embedded. Others blunt the paradox by burying themselves in the form of things, by so carefully, correctly, and dedicatedly playing the hero game of their society that they never risk uniqueness. We call them obsessive compulsive types. By splitting hairs, they control reality to avoid being sucked up by it. They try to banish the idea of accident, obliteration, death. Now, I must say, that paragraph you can probably read a dozen times and you're going to get so much out of it. So I'm not going to read it a dozen times because, oh, Chad is wondering if you think the notebook is salvageable. I do, because a notebook that is, how can I put it, something that is many pages, even if it does get wet, the interior pages can actually kind of glue closed. So you may have a certain amount of sogginess, and I don't think the notebook was soggy, otherwise I think they would have described it as such. They would have said it's this sort of pulp, this tissue pulp. I don't think that's the case. I do think it got water damage, but one wonders exactly what happened. Did it float around? Did rain land on it? Was it in a bag and animals pulled it out? What's the case? But I do think, I think you're going to get a situation where you're going to be able to recover a fraction of it. It might be 30%, it might be 50%, but you're also going to have sections you're not going to recover. The question is, are you going to get to those crucial last pages? And also, are there crucial last pages? Did Brian actually write something? So, that remains to be seen. I hope that answers your question. I think someone did say in an official capacity that they thought it was salvageable. So that's certainly a good sign. Something that I think is quite interesting, if you just think of his name on Instagram, Bizarre Design, right? And you think of that name and this idea of Bizarre Design taking his notebook into the wild and then doing something with it. And I mean, just think of it in a basic way. Bizarre design, and the bizarre design around everything that happened, Gabby, the bizarreness surrounding his disappearance. And then I think there was some kind of bizarre design around what he intended in terms of his moments, right? I'm starting to miss the water that Timmy drank. Okay, so that's the first thing. The other thing that I just want to touch on, why I said I thought Brian was indoors, was I thought that there was a link between the property ownership scenario, the many properties that were owned, and where Brian would more likely go. But it did turn out that he was more of a survivor, outdoorsy guy kind of thing. Subrosa Light says, when are you coming to North America? And I see you in Canada. I actually know someone in Canada. I have actually wanted to go skiing in Canada. I suppose you can ski in America as well. To be honest, I'm waiting for news from CrimeCon. I did submit some information, and if they accept me, then that would be the first step into formalizing everything. So there are certain plans in place, but we'll see what happens with CrimeCon. So I'm now going into 3 reasons for regression. So do you guys agree that somebody who takes their own life has regressed? Also, do you agree that if somebody commits a crime, especially a serious crime, do you agree that that is regression? That you're not moving forward in your life, you're moving backwards. It's a destructive act, but it's something that is taking place because you're not progressing. Notebook was a sketchbook journal. Yeah. I think, what is quite interesting with Vincent Van Gogh is that he would write letters that had sketches between them. And once again today, and it's in the video that I've tried to post earlier, I'll post it immediately after this live. It's about 8 minutes long. I found a photo of the inside of Gabby's tent, and there's a picture of the Zion National Park that is rendered in a Van Gogh style. So it shows you that they were quite interested in him. Didn't Van Gogh regress? It's an interesting question. Yes and no. I think he was incredibly prolific. He was painting a picture a day in the last 70 days of his life. So he did regress when he was in the asylum to some extent. He did have drinking episodes. His health did deteriorate, but I think he was really, doing amazingly well in the last 2 months of his life. He also wrote a huge amount of letters in the last 2 months of his life. So I'm going to read from page 160 from this book by Ernest Becker, where he talks about 3 basic sources of human regression. And what I want you to do is think about it in terms of Gabby and Brian, and then also yourself, right? So try and apply what I'm going to read to Gabby and Brian, but also yourself. So here we go. 3 basic sources of regression. I'm not going to read exactly what he writes because it's a little bit dicey language, but he talks about having a certain kind of tie with the mother. He said, this is a basic idea fundamental to the humanization process, a long period of symbiosis with the mother, wherein the child self is literally embedded in her. And what he's talking about there is obviously when we come into the world, we are literally embedded in another person. We are, there's the symbiosis of the mother. But what he's talking about is, so he goes on to say, each of us cuts the psychological umbilical cord. Now note the words, psychological umbilical cord. Each of us cuts the psychological umbilical cord to varying degrees, and we come to differentiate ourselves somewhat, some of us in larger ways. Now what he's talking about here is where, you can think of a baby that's born that now differentiates in terms of its life, its body, its organismic life from its mother. Gudrun Wickett, thanks a lot for that. But then as someone who's becoming an adult, you might be very much ensconced in your family. You might have a very loving family, but you need to actually cut the psychological cord and you need to become your own person. You need to have your own ideas, your own standards, your own whatever, right? And if you think about Brian in that sense, had he cut the psychological cord with his mother? And think about how sons and mothers and their wives or girlfriends, there's kind of a dynamic there. Do sons treat their partners the way that their mothers have treated them? Is there some kind of connection there? And if there's still a kind of a dependence on the mother, doesn't that translate to a kind of dependence or control or whatever you want to call it with the new female figure in terms of this particular dynamic? I'm not saying it's always got to be female, I'm just saying in terms of this. But what he's getting at here is if you haven't developed that psychological cutting of the umbilical cord, then you're going to lack independence. And so ask yourself, do you think that Brian had achieved that? You could also equally apply that to Gabby and say, because Gabby's calling her mom every day. And, on the one hand, given what happened, that's a good thing. It's a good thing that she was regularly in touch with her mother. But the other side of that is, was she able, and it's not a nice area to go into because I certainly don't want to blame Gabby for anything, but was she an independent enough person when she went on this trip? Could she function on her own, kind of thing? SM Kovalinsky says, I had to thank you for bringing in the text on symbiosis with the mother, which I think is essential here. And then, so think about it in terms of Brian, think about it in terms of Gabby, but also think about it in terms of you. It doesn't matter how old you are or how young you are. Have you emerged from the shadow of your parents? Have you become your own person? Are you an adult? Do you, when I say this, I certainly am not pointing the finger at you in an unkind, I'm pointing the finger at myself as well. Do you complain about your parents and you yourself are 40 or 50 or 60? Do you feel constantly impinged? Because there's a point where you've got to stop being the child and you've got to become the adult. And you've got to accept agency over your life and not kind of scapegoat your parents. You've got to kind of say, I'm cutting the psychological umbilical cord. And some people never do, but you're just putting yourself in a place where you're saying, I'm an adult, I'm going to make adult decisions. I don't need mommy and daddy. I love them and I want them in my life, but I don't need them. I can be fully in charge of my life force, and I'm going to be. I'm not always going to be under their shadow. I want to come out of the shadow. And so that's just something to consider. Because to the extent that you don't do that, I think you can be a problem to other people. Like if the best person to be with is an independent person, and the best person to be with you is an independent person, and that is often something that is achieved by becoming an independent person, by cutting that umbilical cord. And you can become a stronger, more assertive, better person if you're aware that you haven't. And you don't need to just cut it. Think about it. Think about what is going on and start to move out of the shadow. So that's the first thing in terms of regression. The second thing is, so it gives a little bit of background here. He says on page 161, quote, Fromm's point is that at the extreme, many people never overcome the easy merger with a source of protection and power, and this gives rise to a genuine pathology of perception. The person mistrusts himself, his judgment and decisions. He fears initiating action, standing alone. He has a sense of always being less than those around him, of needing the strong hand of the trusted leader on his shoulder to point him at what to do, to steady him, to give his life the mandate that it needs. And this is logical. If you remain fixated to the source of support and protection, you never do find out what it means to stand on your own and judge reality for yourself. Isn't that incredibly powerful? Isn't that incredibly necessary? So it is something that we are required to do to find ourselves in the world and to find out what reality is. And we can't do it when we are under the spell, under the shadow of somebody else, anybody else. Stephanie says, Bushwhacker super chat question, as Brian isn't a suspect, doesn't the notebook become property of the family so they can do what they want with it? That's an interesting question. I would say technically Brian's not a suspect. He hasn't been officially designated a suspect. And I think because he's no longer alive now, the legal things become fairly tricky in a way. So it's possible that his legal status may be, it's difficult to say because it really, in a weird way, because Brian no longer exists, his legal status is almost irrelevant. What becomes more relevant now is the investigation into Gabby Petito. And so I think in that respect, I understand what you're saying, that Brian isn't officially a suspect, but within that respect, I think the notebook will be seen as potentially important evidence in terms of the investigation into what happened to Gabby. So I don't know if that answers your question. Anyway, so I'm going to go on to the next one. So the first thing is being totally embedded into someone that creates this lack of independence, right? And it leads to regression. So we're talking about regression. And so being under someone's shadow leads to regression. In other words, the opposite of that is coming out of someone's shadow, coming out of that embeddedness. How does he put it? Standing alone. That is how you don't regress. Stand alone. The opportunity or the experience of being alone imbues you with, experience of the world, but also independence and growth, right? The second thing is, he says, a second crippler of reality perception is the phenomenon of narcissism, which we mentioned earlier as the will to power. Now we're on page 162. And then he describes, he says, in the benign form, so narcissism in its benign form is healthy self-confidence and an urge to heroism. But in its destructive and exaggerated forms, it becomes an invertedness upon itself, an invertedness upon oneself, and unresponsiveness to the world, and identification with one's little group, his race, class, nation, and the powers of authority. Now, what I want you to think about is Brian in terms of this description. I don't think of Brian as a narcissist, but it's possible that the narcissism that he felt was unhealthy. You could even say that he wasn't narcissistic enough, that he didn't love himself enough, not that he loved himself too much. But listen to what he says. In its destructive form, it becomes inverted upon itself, unresponsive. Now think about Brian sort of not wanting to engage socially with other people, wanting to wear barefoot. He talks about an identification with one's little group. Brian's little group was basically Gabby, and to some extent, perhaps his family. That's the only group he seemed to be interested in. And then it goes on to say, foremost is the distortion of rational judgment. Everything that belongs to the narcissist, to his group, is overvalued. Everything that reflects the outsider is undervalued. That is such an incredible observation, because what he's saying there is that in terms of this definition is saying exactly what I was saying about the Zaps, is that the Zaps value the outsider. The Zaps value the outside world. The Zaps value society. The Zaps value community. And Brian didn't. Brian resented society, rejected the community, didn't want to be part of it. And that's a distortion of his judgment, that he thinks, well, there's something wrong with the whole world, right? He goes and says, one emerges from the Oedipal embeddedness and becomes a fully and truly social person, a universal human being, or one does not, right? So in other words, what Becker's kind of saying is that it is good if a person goes into the maelstrom of society and they're going to be shaped into whoever they are. You can't do that alone. So you need to be alone, but you can't stay alone with no one around you. You've got to, as a lone person, go into society without borrowing strength from someone else. And he's saying that you've got to become a universal human being, almost like a man for all seasons. You experience lots of different people, situations, and environments. And then he says, narcissism leads also to the same blind worship of the leader that we noted above, the leader who is ours and who represents our truth to the world and who can do no wrong. So that's, I'm not sure how relevant that is to Brian, but that brings us to, unless you're going to say that Brian's worship of the leader is to some extent the way that he, I won't say worship, but admired certain artists, admired certain filmmakers, where you totally become embedded in terms of your philosophy in someone else's philosophy, in someone else's ideas. And then he brings up the third point. I can't quite read it here because I'll get into trouble with YouTube. It's on the 62. He says, finally, there is the word sadistic character that we mentioned several times. This character seems to be the result of cold, mechanical, joyless, oppressive bringing up, both in the home and under the depersonalized, alienating conditions of bureaucratic industrial society. He loves order, routine, mechanical things, and he fears openness, spontaneity, and living things. So he prefers things to persons, order over freedom, and ultimately death over life. Someone who takes their own life is someone who is fearing openness, fearing spontaneity, fearing life. The pathology of his perception is to see beauty in that which is frozen and not fluid, and that which is possessed and controlled rather than that which is free and surprising. I think about that in terms of his relationship with Gabby. Did he want Gabby to be free and surprising, or did he want to possess her and control her and freeze her into almost like Han Solo in that, when he was carbonized, whatever. He says, above all, to worship those who use force, coercion, and destruction to impose an iron pattern on life and reality. And I'll just think about the psychology of Fight Club and those words, force, coercion, and destruction to impose an iron pattern on life and reality. It's not just an iron pattern on a person, but also on reality. You're forcing reality to be the way that you're seeing it. That's it. Thanks, Stephanie. So I think you'll agree with me. This is incredibly profound, and is kind of profound, leads you into really profound areas. The last thing I'm going to read is on page 50, and it's a chapter dealing with socialization, the creation of the inner world. Batman, thanks a lot for that. We're going right to the beginning, where he's talking about how a child develops a symbolic construct around themselves, but it's got application to us as adults as well. So he says, page 50, he says, the important question in childhood experience is what is taking place in the child's training, not only within his body. Think about Brian in terms of, was Brian learning anything? Was he being educated? Was he skilled in anything? Was he developing in some way as a human being? You could say he was an artist, but what about in other ways? Was he training his thinking? So he goes on to say his natural problems are complicated by his relationship to an adult, by a process of adaptation to someone else. Just jumping a few lines, then he says, this is really interesting. He says, we understand that a child becomes tense, mechanical, and a word that starts with the A, I'm not going to repeat it here, not because of strictly scheduled toilet training or meticulous bodily cleanliness and orderliness, But because of a lack of joy and spontaneity in the child's environment, anxieties about life which are communicated to him and which cause him to shut up within himself and make him try extra hard for basic security. And so what this suggests is if you are lacking in basic joy and spontaneity in your environment, now think about the pandemic in terms of that, right? Don't show I'd rather you don't say the words that I'm trying not to say, otherwise they just demonetize the channel. But anyway, you are right about that. Alina Wolf, before we jump to reactionary response, we need to examine all the evidence. Appreciate all you do and share. Beyond the deaths, they had lives too. Yeah. So anxiety is a really big theme in this, and something that I think touches on all of us. All of us have been forced to deal with anxiety during, especially the last 2 years. We are in an anxious world right now, and this was Gabby and Brian's, their response to it, and it kind of didn't work. They somehow went into a more anxious place. The crux of this confusion is that the child is only his body. He is only a body with a very meager self or internal furnishing. He is not yet a fully symbolic animal. Now you might think, what has this got to do with Brian? But it does have something to do with it. Think about Brian as he speaks about he wants to walk around barefoot. Also, he spoke about, at one point he climbed onto some rock and he said how people were so impressed they didn't know how he got there. And so he sort of thinks that is quite an amazing physical achievement. But that is because Brian really didn't achieve much in the social media sense, which is to say the symbolic sense. He hadn't achieved much. Something I've been wanting to say for quite a while about Brian and about becoming a man is, in order to be with someone that you want to be, you need to be someone of substance. And if you're not someone of substance, you can't get that from somebody else. Does that make sense? You can't get substance from someone else, or being with someone is important. You can only become a person of substance, and that takes time. That takes effort. That takes work. That takes learning something and developing yourself. And in that respect, then you can have the confidence to say, this person is with me because I'm a person of substance. And maybe it applies in the other way as well. So the last thing I'm going to say is on page 51, and it touches on Brian sort of bragging about walking around barefoot and being able to climb rocks. Not that these are really big achievements, but comparing it to a child. And he says on page 51, his body is the coin by which he tries to successfully transact his love relationship to his mother, and it provides the cues for this relationship. Look at my cut. Think about if you're a mother and you've got little boys or little children, them saying these things. Look at my cut. You didn't see where I banged myself yesterday, and so on and so on. The more the child is confused and frustrated by the demands of the adult world, the more he falls back on his body and on the ministrations to his body as a way of getting along. The child is forced to affirm the priority of the body of the shadowy world of symbols. Hence, he's a natural sadist. He loves to urinate and defecate on things, even to the displeasure of his parents. He is showing the sadist's power of affirming priority over the physical world, over the symbol world of the adults. I could go into quite a lot of detail to say how this could apply to Brian, but I'm going to leave that to you to think about. I'll leave that to you guys to think about. It's also very early in this case to be talking too brazenly about certain things. Janelle says the community here is amazing. We like to think so. Okay. Mods, please don't show Amy's word there, just because you've got to be careful saying certain things. I know on another channel you say something and they think that that what you're doing is pornographic, but you're just using a certain word, and it just doesn't let you post then. And it's just the way the algorithms run. So it's just kind of unfortunate. I see I've made it 15 minutes past my self-imposed deadline. I've still got that little bit of water that is keeping me talking. I wonder if I should take some more of your comments. I've spoken about grief. I've spoken about anxiety. I don't know anyone who doesn't have anger issues. Okay. I think one way to avoid anger is to, one thing that is good about anger is it activates you. It's better to be angry than to be depressed. There's quite a lot to be angry about in our world right now because our world is frustrating. But one way to avoid anger is to avoid drama. You can choose to engage with drama, or you can decide that you what's your next case? I don't think I'm done with the Gabby Petito case, but I will probably do two things now. One is we're coming up to the anniversary of the John Benet Ramsey case. I was covering the John Benet Ramsey case I've done it a lot. I've written quite a few books on the John Benet Ramsey case, but I'll probably return to narrating an audiobook in probably late November and December, maybe even January. So I'll probably be doing that. And then I must also finish an audiobook on Cantonese. So we'll have a look at that. It's quite amazing. I've just done a lot of focus on the Gabby Petito case, and I'm just really grateful for my patrons for sticking with me, because we had all sorts of things that we would do in a program. There would be one day Laurie Vallow, one day this, one day that, and the Gabby Petito case, and to some extent the Summer Wells case, totally swallowed all of that up just because so much was happening. But as a true crime channel, I do want to be topical. I do want to be relevant, and I don't want to kind of regress into really old cases when brand new cases are coming out. And one of the things as a true crime channel, I want to test myself. So I don't want to be afraid to make a prediction like I think Brian's indoors and be wrong about it. I assumed he was alive. And if he was alive, and if he was still alive, I think he would have been indoors if he wanted to survive, kind of thing. And at the same time, we've got to test our critical thinking against reality. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Mr. Mina says, what do you think caused his death? I think it was caused by a bullet. Lone Seagull just discovered your channel. Thanks, Lone Seagull. I hope you enjoy it here. Okay, so I'll take a couple more questions, maybe for 5 minutes. Let's see if we can get to 1,000 likes. I see there 1,100 of you in chat. Let's see and we had 750 likes. Let's see if we can get to 1,000. I want to thank you guys for all your super chats. Really appreciate it. I don't know, this live was something that I wasn't really looking forward to. I was sort of dreading in a way, and you guys have made it a lot easier to get through, so I really appreciate it. Mods, thanks very much. Also, just everyone who's here, thanks a lot for your questions. The firearm he used, I think it's the one that is in his bedroom, the one that is the color of the American flag. I mean, the question is that firearm still in his bedroom? Where is it? If it's not, that is really the big question, is where is that firearm? Are they going to find it on the scene. I did mention earlier in this chat, I said, if they don't find it, then you've got to consider another possibility, such as a poison bite or something, an alligator attack or something. Yvonne Phillips, thanks for another great live. Whatever you choose to discuss is A-okay with us. Thanks, Yvonne. Corin H, I'm so sorry you went through so much this month. Thanks a lot. The month is almost over. I did have a very nice break kind of in the middle of the month. That was definitely good. So that was important to break that up. What do you think of the Alec Baldwin situation? I must say, the fact that 2 people got shot, to me, is odd. I clearly don't think it's intentional, but I think it's very, very unfortunate. And it shouldn't ever happen again. You should never have live rounds on a film set. It's happened before, and it should never happen again. I don't know why I don't know why we're here. To me, it's just very unfortunate, very, very tragic. I feel very sorry for that cinematographer. Valerie Blakeman, thanks very much. Corin Sanderson, impressive previous work. I'm happy you shared it. Thank you. The Crow, yeah. That's it. Just wiggling through life. New here. Can you tell me how many books you've written and how we can find them? I've written 101 books. They are all on Amazon. I've got about 19 or 20 audiobooks on Patreon. So if you want to hear me narrating the books, then, and there's a little bit of additional, background and additional stuff around the writing of the books, and then you could head to Patreon. It's quite good value. Some of the books are available for $5 on Patreon, so $5 for as many audiobooks as you can consume in a month, and some for $10. Those are the longer books. But you'll find it on Amazon. I don't know if Stephanie can put up there it is. Well, Stephanie, you're on the ball. Heather Walton, do you think his father tried to stop him leaving? I think he did. His father actually said that he did, from what I have seen. I did read something about Alec Baldwin where he apparently, I think they wanted to do a take again, and then he sort of made a joke. And that is when he thought he was, He thought he was pretend shooting, but aimed it at these 2 people, and then it actually went off. I don't think he's a bad person. I don't think he had any intent. That's the bottom line. Lisa Jane says 101 books. Wow. And you might think that's unlikely, but I've spent about 7 years writing books, one after the other. And that came from all of this. That came from magazine journalism, writing to deadlines, writing on spec, being a fully freelance photojournalist and needing to earn my bread and butter that way. And then I went over to writing books, and really glad that I did. It was not a decision. Most people would have said you're crazy, and it actually, I backed myself, and true crime definitely has a very strong market, a very strong available market, and high-profile true crime especially. And so I wrote about Jodi Arias, after Oscar Pistorius, O.J. Simpson, Casey Anthony, Scott Peterson, Amanda Knox. I don't know if you guys have heard. Amanda Knox has just had a baby. Also, Chris Watts, many books on that. Stephen Avery, 2 books on that. Quite a few books I started writing, but then I got pulled into other cases that were happening. So I would start a book, and then and then I'd want to finish it, I'd sort of be pulled into another true crime case that was sort of breaking. And so I've got a couple of books that are unfinished that I started with. I got to a certain point, then I got yanked out of it. I've written quite a few books on the 96 Everest disaster. In fact, my 101st book was on 96 Everest disaster. And ironically enough, I actually mentioned my best friend in that book. There's kind of a moment where I was just talking about, the importance of having a coach or a leader that inspires you. And I actually mentioned my friend there. What is Into Thin Air about? Yes, that is what Into Thin Air is about, 96 Everest disaster. So I kind of treated the 96 Everest disaster as a crime scene. I'm forgetting some books. I also wrote about the West Memphis Three, the murder of Vincent Van Gogh. I'm just trying to, I think there's another high-profile case that Patrick Frazier, I've written about, quite a few books. Batman says, you inspire us to write. Well, I hope I also inspire you to read. I'm finishing Exposed. What is your book title about, Jodi Arias? Well, there are 5 or 6 books. The first one is Audacity, then Authenticity, then I think it's Vanity, then Obscenity, and then Obscurity. I may have missed one there, but it's yes, the McCanns. The McCanns, I've written quite a few books about them. I must say it's a totally different level of research, researching a book than making lots of YouTube videos. You spend far more time and effort, and you get far less for it. But the narrative is so much stronger. The details are so much better when you write a book, because it's all got to work together. You become an expert on things like timelines. You become an expert at who the person actually is. You get a superficial view and feeling of a person when you do it this way, whereas when you write their words down, when you get every single thing that they've ever said that you can get hold of, you write those words out, you get a sense of who they are. Sometimes you write and you want to put a word there that you think they said, and then you realize they actually didn't say that, they said that. You get the sense of who they really are. So there's one more thing I wanted to say in this live stream, which is that, and it might surprise some of you, I don't think, like a lot of people think this Gabby Petito case is the most high-profile case, and it is, but that we're never going to see anything like this again. I think this is the beginning of this sort of supercharged time in true crime. What I mean by that is, look at the way social media, including the social media of the perpetrator, the social media of the victim, the social media of all of us, look how that is starting to interact seamlessly with the media and how they sort of work together. And it's becoming a much more richer, immersive experience, this living thing that never was before. In the past, you waited till there was a court case and then you wrote a book, and you wrote just one book. Now it's totally, totally different. There's so much more. There's body cam. There is just so much more. And because there's so much more, it is so much more real. In a way, it is, I don't know. Because of that, I think it's really, really compelling because reality is now so close to us, you know. And I think that's what some people are searching for in true crime, is a way to test their perception of reality, and maybe also to manipulate others with their views of reality, kind of thing. When I started my first book on true crime, it was on the Oscar Pistorius case, and I was Facebook friends with the victim, and the very first book I wrote was a story about the victim through her Facebook post. She was just a very eloquent person, and her Facebook was quite well put together and very cogent. And so I wanted the victim's story to be told, and so that's what I did. And what a long way we've come from there in a weird way. Like, that was 7 years ago, or a little bit longer, 8 years ago. And now it is quite normal to look at someone's social media the way we have now. JJ Whitty says, if anyone wrote a book about me, I would be in the stockade. Really? Have you done bad things? Paula J says, how do you think Brian Laundrie died? I think he took his own life, and I think he used his handgun that was in his bedroom. That is a lot of books. That is a lot of books. I was saying to someone not that long ago, I don't know if I'm going to write any more books. I think it's a pity if I don't. But writing books is really, really hard work, takes a lot out of you. I hope that I will continue to write books. I certainly won't ever write as many books and as quickly as I wrote in the past, which is in a way a shame, but the other side is I don't need to, so that's good for me. Writing books is very, very hard work, very, very lonely work. In the 8 years that I wrote those books, it was like being voluntarily locked down. And the irony is that when I decided I'm not done, but I'm sort of coming out of my own self-imposed lockdown, the world lockdown, just like, you will not. And at that point, I think I'd written 99 books. So it was like, I'm not quite at my goal of 100 books. And it was like, you will not take a break. The world is locked down. You stay where you are, keep writing. It's kind of a weird situation. Storm Kate 77 says, you mean the USA patent one? Yes. Christopher Marshburn, good to see you. Parents took the gun from the reserve and disposed of it. Question. That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, it's possible. Obviously, that is now part of the confusion because they had access. But it's not going to be difficult to know. I do think if everything is just innocent and normal, it shouldn't be so hard to find. You just use a metal detector, but who knows? What did Stephanie say? Write what you're inspired to write. I may, after the death of my friend, I may want to write about different things. I might want to write different things. I don't know. I might want to write about travel. I might, if I travel to America, that might be a book. Visiting, Colorado and so on. But I don't know. We'll see. Corin H, if you don't need to neck, give yourself a break. Okay. Go Gator says, what's your favorite book of your own? Please share. It's called Bloodline. It's a book I actually took about 20 years to write. Right now it's, I would prefer, if you want to buy that book, I'd prefer that you buy it sort of a little bit later on, because I want to release it in the original format of 5 books, and right now you can buy it as 1 book. And I just want to make it 1 or 2 changes. So that is something I might be doing in December or January. I might be doing that on Patreon, reading it to my patrons. But I'll probably do that and a true crime, because I know some people will say, it's like John Grisham, he writes about the law. When he writes about something else, not interested. So I would love for my patrons to love that book. So we'll see if that does happen. I think some of my early sort of revelations with Ernest Becker went into that book. But I do think, and one of the key messages in that book is life goes on after the end of the world. It was kind of like something that I needed to believe myself. And I kind of said it to myself quite a few times in certain situations. Life goes on even after the end of the world, meaning obviously something devastating has happened to me, right? But if you think of it in a global sense, and that is what the story is about, the world being reduced to eventually one person. So literally the end of our world, the human world. And then life goes on. The world gets reduced to a person, and then he doesn't die, he continues to be alive, although everyone around him has died. But then he continues to live. And then you've got to do something with that. And so it's quite a bleak story, but it's also an incredibly epic story. It's kind of like Game of Thrones on steroids, sort of the Last Kingdom with some sci-fi thrown into it. So I hope that answers your question. Will there be a coroner's inquest with witnesses? I do expect that there will be. This isn't over. It's not like everything just ends. The investigation into Gabby Petito continues, and there will be a legal process. The investigation will continue. If anything, it might actually expedite everything, and it might actually allow a kind of unopposed release of information in a sense, because you've not got certain things to prove or to test in court. It's simply what the authorities believe happened, just their assessment. Susan Timmerman says, thank you so much for spending time with us tonight. Most enjoyable YouTube time I've spent. Best wishes, and I will go to Amazon next. Thanks, Susan. Patricia says you should write a book about true crime in the digital age. I kind of did, although I'm not sure if this. I did write a book called On Writing for Kindle. So if some of you caught the other video I did, I said Stephen King is like a writing hero, but he's kind of from the previous dispensation when you published books, and you only published books, right? And you took 6 months to write. One thing that I learned from Stephen King is that you should write fast. And if anyone applied that, I did. And it definitely worked. Thanks, Betty Blue. Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap up. Here's a last thing. This is my great-grandfather. And so he was also kind of a van lifer, if you look at that over there. And so he went from Cape Town, and you maybe want to look at that on a map. He built this. This is something that he built. It's not like he didn't buy that thing. He built it as well. He was a carpenter. And then he drove from Cape Town to the Victoria Falls with us, and then he painted the Victoria Falls. So he was a van lifer, and he didn't post it on social media. He painted stuff. So how's that? So it's something I guess I know a little bit about. And here he is actually painting on the bonnet, on the trunk of the vehicle that he'd done. I don't know if you can see. He's got his painting there and so on. So anyway. Okay, so that's it, guys. Let me just see if there are any final questions. Anne Marie said your channel really took off during the pandemic. Some people's channels really exploded during the Gabby Petito case. There's one YouTuber that went from 1,000 subs before to she's over 30,000 now. That's not bad growth. Stephanie says, question from SD. Can you discuss the 911 calls to the laundry home between September 9 and 10? I'm aware of that. It's kind of a bit like the John Benet Ramsey case. It's like, because there was a 911 call 3 days on December 23rd. The question is it relevant? And it just feels like it is. How is it not relevant? So I can't say too much about that because I don't know what the content of the calls were, but the most important thing there is the date, September 9 and 10. When was Gabby reported missing? You could almost imagine, and I'm speculating here, but I'm also just imagining. You can imagine a situation almost of someone talking about what happened, and as that conversation is unfolding, someone kind of going, oh my God, and picking up the phone to make a call, and then they either change their mind or something like that. Is that inconceivable? Is that unreasonable? Is that unrealistic? All I'm saying is look at the timing, September 9 and 10, and when Gabby was ultimately reported missing. September 11th, right? Mr. Mina says, can't wait for next time. The next time might be next Sunday, but we'll see. Betty Blue, night, Nick, you make my nightlife wonderful. Thank you for being here. Thanks, guys. Again, I just want to thank everyone for being here. I see just still quite a few of you in chat, but I'm going to be heading away. Keep an eye on my channel. I'm going to be putting out a video immediately after this, so don't go too far. So as soon as this live ends, check the channel and you'll see the next video up. And it's to do with the water bottle. How many of you think, let's just do a quick poll, how many of you think the water bottle that was found today is genuine? Is the water bottle of Gabby and Brian? Put up a 1 if you think yes, 2 no. Thanks, Roxanne. Joyce Cherry, thanks you, Nick, very informative. Thanks a lot. So far, most of you think it's legit. I also think it is. And if it is, it's not a good look for the cops. It's not a good look. But we'll see. You know, who knows if there's some mischief involved. Okay, guys, thanks very much. Wherever you are in the world, if you've got some of your weekend left, hope you enjoy it. And take care, stay safe, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao. Annika, good to see you there. Hope you have a good sleep.